Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us on LinkedIn. I'm Autumn Morgan, the marketing coordinator here at Planet Argon. This is Planet Argon Live, our webinar series where we share short, practical sessions on all things Rails and beyond, from tackling legacy code and modernizing apps to improving workflows and solving some tricky technical challenges. Our speaker today is Sergiu Truta, a developer here at Planet Argon. He's worked on a wide range of hosting setups and app migrations, and he'll be sharing the lessons and best practices that make these moves smoother. Today's session is all about something that can feel a little bit intimidating, safely migrating your app to a different hosting platform. Sergiu will walk us through a step-by-step framework to keep downtime low and data safe during this process. These tips apply to any tech stack and aren't limited just to Rails, so this should be helpful and informative to any dev team. Just so you know, we'll have time for Q&A at the end, so feel free to drop your questions in the comments as we go. And with that, I will hand it over to Sergiu. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Let me share my screen. Autumn, can you confirm you can see it? Okay. So the question is, why would anyone change their hosting, right? I mean, if you have a working hosting and you're happy with it, you don't need to migrate. But we have helped a lot of different customers to move their application because of many different reasons, whether their current hosting platform costs are high, or they make some architecture changes which allow switching to a different host, or they want to try something new, or they maybe want to optimize a bit how their application architecture is, the current architecture is. So there are a lot of different reasons for doing this. It can be a bit intimidating at first if you haven't done this, right? But if you know some basic rules on what to watch out for, what not to do when you switch your hosting migration, it's not that complex. And, once you've done it once or twice, especially if you made some mistakes, it will be fairly easy to remember what you have to do. Another reason to switch your hosting is, for example, some frameworks like the one that we prefer, which is Ruby on Rails, have added in the most recent versions a lot of tools to allow a single engineer to handle everything, not just the application itself, but the entire setup, the server, and all this. So if you are one of those and want to migrate away from, for example, Heroku or AWS, or you have a small application and you want to move from a VPN provider to a different one, but don't want to lose any data or rush into a situation where the complexity is completely overwhelming, then it's good to know a few basic rules. So, and I will give a few examples with, for example, one of them being the simplest solution or very simple setup, and the other one being a complex setup where you have to figure out really complex stuff. So this is the most basic architecture of an application, and what you see at the top here, let's say, is a live application which is being used by users, and you have the most simple description of the stack is that you have the application on top, which is using a database and then store some files. Let's say, for example, files uploaded by the users or generated by the users, right? And you want to migrate this to a completely different platform. So the first thing you do is you duplicate the setup on the new platform, right? So that may mean, let's take, for example, DigitalOcean or Heroku. Let's take Heroku because a lot of Rails developers know and are familiar to Heroku. So let's say you migrate to Heroku, right? So you deploy the application, you create a new database, import a recent database copy in it, and copy the files. Hopefully, actually on Heroku you cannot because the file system doesn't, between deployments is lost, right? So that's one of the reasons why the next step is take out any files. We have seen this. I know this is applies mostly to older architectures where files used to be stored locally. So you had big servers with a lot of storage because storage was cheap, right? So you were just storing files over there. But that's not the case anymore with S3 and similar services. So the first step we recommend to do is move out the file so that you don't actually have to store files on your server anymore. And this is actually required for some platforms like Heroku, like I mentioned, because between deployments, you will lose everything that the users have uploaded. So if you move to AWS S3 or something else, then you completely, I mean, you simplified your architecture and the files can be stored in S3 no matter where you move your application, right? So the next time you migrate to a different platform, you won't have to think about, oh, I have all the user uploaded files. What do I do with those? So they can stay there. And now what you have to migrate is just the application and the database, right? So, okay, next step is you have all the setup on the new platform and it's totally identical with the application setup on the initial platform, right? And what you do now initially, and this is very important, you just for example, in Heroku and other platforms, you set your application to maintenance mode. This way, no new user-generated data will be stored in the database. And this is very important because while you migrate, you don't want new data to be generated. So you stop any traffic coming in. You have right now the existing application that, I mean, the initial application that is used by users, but no one is actually touching it anymore. So next step is, okay, because the most recent version of your database is on the initial platform, now is the time to create a new database dump and copy that and import that on the new platform. What you have now is an exact copy of both the code, that's assuming you have deployed the most recent version of the code on the new platform. So you have an exact copy of the code and of the data, right? So this is very important. Don't forget, and I will stress this every time, almost during each step, no traffic needs to be, touching the initial platform. Step 3, like I said, deploy the most recent code to make sure you have the most recent code. And now, if you have other things to do, like, for example, Elasticsearch, or you have other dependencies or other servers, this is the time to rebuild all the indexes or push whatever needs to be cached in Redis or memcached or whatever other architecture specific modules you are using or dependencies. And because you have the code, you have the data, now is the time for Rails, for example, to log into the Rails console and make sure that the database connection is working. All the data is there, everything is working exactly as expected. So now no traffic is going to the initial platform, and the new platform is completely ready to receive traffic, right? So now you update the DNS records, wherever you keep those, with to point to the new platform, right? But the initial platform needs to remain in, again, maintenance mode. That's how you actually prevent traffic from going to it. So even if, because the DNS propagation takes a while, so let's say you are, I don't know, in US and you change to a different provider, maybe in US the DNS records will be updated in the next few minutes or the next 30 minutes, but maybe in Australia or somewhere else or New Zealand it will take like 10 hours or whatever. So you don't want those users who don't get updated on the new DNS records to generate new data. That's the most complex situation which you will have to fix or hopefully won't have to fix, right? So as you update the records, traffic will start flowing fairly, quick into your new platform. So new data at this point is generated and stored in your database. At this point, basically what you have in the initial platform is outdated, so you are missing data there, and new data is generated on the new platform. The initial platform needs to remain in maintenance mode. So now you need to check again that everything is working correctly. Maybe you have scenarios, a user scenario to test, like log in, sign up, purchase something, or bookmark something, or interact with someone, or the application in a specific way. So do that to make sure everything is working. Again, the initial platform is in maintenance mode. If you find any issue at this point, so for example, you find something not working, whatever detail, or there is a dependency not working, which needs to be fixed. If you have to touch the code or update something in the code, update it, deploy again, but do not switch to the initial platform, because now this is basically at this point, because you have updated the DNS records and the users are using the new instance of the app, try to avoid as much as possible going back to the initial platform, right? Because that has new data missing, so it's not there anymore. You can go back, and I will touch, actually you can see at the described here what you have to do, but you need to avoid that as much as possible. So if the issues that you have found are fixable, fix them, and treat the legacy or the initial platform as a legacy one. You don't need to go back to it. If you find something that cannot be fixed, or some dependency, or maybe you have a third-party API which doesn't allow you to use it because of IPs, or something you forgot, or something is broken, and you want to go back to the initial platform, then what you have to do, is set the new platform on maintenance mode, because the number one rule to keep in mind is never allow new traffic to go to both apps. That's the thing too. If you want to remember only just one rule for hosting migration, that's the rule. Never allow traffic to go to both platforms at the same time, because this way you have new data generated on both platforms, and then how do you figure out? It's very complex. That's even just touching on that, like maybe you have very important data like user purchases, and less important data, a user bookmarking something or liking. You have to choose what to import, and how do you figure out how to merge that data. So it's very, very complex. It's much easier to follow the base rule, never allow traffic to go to both platforms. So if you have to go back, then set the new instance to maintenance mode, create a database dump, import it on the initial platform, then update the DNS records and allow traffic to go to it. And then figure out, fix that, and start from step one. And of course, when you're happy with the migration and everything is working fine, and you don't have any problems anymore, you can clean up, remove the resources on the initial platform, or you can still keep those for a while, just if you want a fail-safe there. Each application has its own approach to this, right? So let's recap a bit. So step one, step zero, actually, initially, so pre-setup or is create or completely duplicate the architecture on the new platform. Then you migrate the files or migrate the files outside of the server, like on Amazon S3 or on DigitalOcean or wherever else. Then copy the database from the initial platform to the new platform and set up the initial platform, the application on the initial platform to maintenance mode. This way you are ready to actually finalize the migration and, rebuild indexes if you use Elastic server or anything like that, or set up Redis or Memcached or whatever you need in there, and then you can update the DNS records and allow traffic to go to the new platform. It's, of course, a welcome and recommended step to keep monitoring the new platform to make sure it works as it should, right? Because that being new, there may be things you haven't thought of or you haven't planned. So keep your eyes on it, and whatever issues you can find, just fix them, deploy if a deploy is needed, or update the architecture, right? But again, rule number one, or the base rule to never forget, never allow um, traffic to go to both platforms, the initial one and the new one. And how do you do that? By keeping the initial platform on maintenance mode. That's it. It's very simple. Now, let me give you an example of a simpler setup. So, for example, if you want to simplify this, and if it's possible in your application architecture, for example, we have an app that's using Node.js, and the database is not stored on the server, on the platform, actually. So the database is hosted on MongoDB. So one less dependency to migrate, which makes it very easy. And we have had this issue a few weeks ago. It makes it very easy to switch to a different platform because the only thing we had to switch was the application, right? So what happened a few weeks ago, there was an external API connection that was broken because of some bot fighting rules, which were triggering for an API. So it was wrongly, deciding that that's a user, not an API call. So there was some wrong logic there, but we had to fix the issue quickly. And because our files were stored in AWS S3, because the database was in MongoDB, it was very easy. We just deployed on a different platform where it was the servers, the instances were using a different IP, and that bot fighting rule was not triggered. So very easy. When the issue was fixed, we just switched back to the new platform, and that's it. So that's a very simple example. If you want to, I mean, if this allows you, if your application allows you to use, AWS Aurora or MongoDB or something else stored in the cloud, then that simplifies it a lot. Now, on the other side, a very complex situation is where you allow traffic to go to both platforms at the same time, and that's very, very complex. There can be a lot of different approaches to how do you merge, how do you decide, because you have just data both here, and how do you migrate, how do you actually merge that? And while your apps, or at least one of them, keeps allowing traffic because you don't want your application to be down and your users not being able to use it, right? So at that point, my advice, or one approach is decide what's actually important, what data is important to be recovered, and recover that. If you need to recover everything, then you'll probably have to take your application to maintenance mode for a lot longer. It depends on the application architecture a lot. That's it. Autumn, please let me know if we have any questions.
All right, I do not see any questions right now. Let's give everybody a second. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments. We can go over those really fast.
So, for example, let me while we wait for questions, I can also um, I just remembered of a situation we had during one of these migrations where we were using, I don't remember what tool we were using to migrate the database. And every time, so we migrated the database, we copied the new version into the new database instance, and then we checked in the application and data was missing. So we did this a few times and data was not there and it wasn't clear, right? We were relying on some tool offered by that platform and it wasn't actually migrating all the data. So of course, we went the old school way and just SSH'd into the server, manually created a database dump, copied that over, imported that, and the data was there. So sometimes these smart tools, which allow so-called smart tools, which allow you to migrate easier, should not be taken for granted because they do work most probably in the scenarios where they are tested, but the applications out there are so different that you cannot actually plan for everything and anything that can happen. So uh, yeah, sometimes the manual solution may be the way to go, but of course it takes longer than these automatic tools, but at least you have that option, right?
All right, we have one question. Robbie asks, what's the best hosting platform so we never have to move to another hosting platform until we die?
It depends who you ask, right? So based on Rails' new direction, which we like, of course, because we work in Rails, the best platform is cheap machine which you keep in your closet. That's the best platform. If But if you prefer, the most comfortable way, then the best platform will probably be the one that gives you less and less headaches. Not that a cheap machine in your closet will give you headaches, right? But at least you have to make sure when you leave your house that there is power, or someone didn't step over your Ethernet cable or something. So or you need to keep updating, make sure you apply security patches to your Ubuntu machine or whatever OS you are using. So that is also a way to learn a lot of stuff. But if you don't want to do that, right, it's using a hosted platform which is affordable. That can be, for example, Render, or that can be Fly.io, or it can be even Heroku if you're just starting up and use the cheap dynos, or DigitalOcean, which I like a lot, right? DigitalOcean, which has added also, they have an app platform and it's very easy to deploy on it. I think this is one of the most subjective questions to ask, right? I have I have used Render from the beginning, and more recently, I'm not using it that much anymore because their plans have become more expensive for different reasons. AWS in the end always proves the most reliable one, or at least in our experience, even though we haven't used, physical servers in a while, which can be very reliable too. But AWS is very reliable. We have chosen in most recent years or months, we have chosen to use AWS, which has on top of it something that helps you manage your servers easier. For example, Cloud 66, but there are others also, just because it's easier to, and can even be safer to just do a Git push and trigger a deployment, or click a button and trigger a deployment, instead of having to maintain SSH keys to always be sure and be aware who is actually able in the team to SSH into your server, right? So that's very important. So if you don't want to handle that, and it's also a security thing, so if none in the team can actually SSH into the server, it means the server is more secure. So using a platform will simplify these things. But all of this applies to simple apps, right? So apps where medium, small to medium-sized apps, or medium to large-sized apps, have at least one sysadmin, handling all the security and everything and taking care of that. So I think most probably each engineer, backend engineer, will have more than one answer to that question.
All right, we have one more question from Jose. He says, what's the best way to migrate old assets, vendor folder, sprockets, Webpacker stuff, to one of the new Rails assets pipelines?
That's not in this presentation. That's a completely different thing. It's a very interesting question, but we may actually take that into account and prepare the answer in a different session. Yeah. It depends on what you used to use for assets before and what do you want to use now, like import maps or something else. So that question is, can be divided in a lot of different contexts and answers. But Jose, thank you. We'll keep that in mind.
All right. It looks like that's it for the questions. So thank you, Sergiu. You made something very complex and intimidating feel much more approachable. So this wraps up today's episode of Planet Argon Live. We'll be back soon with more sessions from our team on Rails, legacy apps, workflows, and more tips. If you enjoyed this talk, make sure to follow us here on LinkedIn so you don't miss the next one. And we'll also share the replay shortly so you can pass it on to anyone in your team who you think might find it beneficial. And thanks again for joining us. Thank you, Sergiu, for your talk, and we'll see you next time on Planet Argon Live.
Thank you.